and welcome to this episode of the DC Life podcast. Today, we're going to chat with someone about something in the life of our church. Well, today we have another of our Getting to Know You podcasts where we hear the faith journey of someone from Disciples Church. And today we have in the studio Mel McCallum. Hi, Mel.
Hey.
Hey, Mel.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Now, tell us about the beginning. Where did it all start for you?
Well, I grew up in Perth. I am the last of two sisters and a brother.
Okay.
There's a bit of a gap between me and my sister, 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
So although I grew up with siblings for most of my childhood, I grew up kind of like an only child. Perth was great, loved Perth. Grew up in a Christian family. Mum and Dad belonged to the Reformed Church. Mum and Dad were always working. Dad was always, elder of the church, like very, very kind of normal Christian upbringing, I guess.
Mm.
Positive?
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, you said there's a big gap between you and your siblings and mum and dad are busy. So do you have a closer connection with anyone in your family over the others?
I would say that I'm fairly close to one of my sisters more than the others, mainly because my brother moved away when I was like 10. He moved to Tassie and got married. My other sister left home really early, like when she was like 17, 18, and it was just me and my other sister at home for many, many years together. So it was probably her that I would be closest to, I guess.
That's nice to have that bond. And what was school life like for you growing up?
Yeah, I went to the Christian school kind of that the church was tied to. So like a lot of the kids that I went to church with, I also went to school with. And I went to school, the same school from, in WA we didn't have prep, so it was grade 1 right through to grade 12. So I started school with 27 of my fellow classmates and ended year 12 with the same 27 fellow classmates. So it was a very stable, structured schooling life for me.
Gee, that'd have like so many great memories. I can't imagine what that's like.
No, and it was really foundational in terms of that peer influence and relationship that you had both at church and I guess, at school as well. So in those formative years, that was, now that I look back on that, that was probably really important
Great.
for me, yeah.
You have a Dutch heritage, don't you?
I do.
Do you make poffertjes?
Poffertjes?
That's it.
I don't, but I do
don't.
make croquettes.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And has that that family background shaped anything about you, like personality, or just whatever?
Yes, absolutely. I guess the church we belonged to was a fairly strong Dutch immigrant church. And they founded the school that I went to. So there was a really strong Dutch population in the school. So we were all like-minded. We're very Dutch people that tend to speak their mind. They're quite direct.
Double Dutch?
Not so much double Dutch. But there is kind of this saying that, in the Dutch culture, if you don't have something to offer, a conversation or an opinion about something, it could be in the Dutch culture quite offensive. So we're so used to offering that up, which, can sometimes make friends or break friends. But
Well, at least you had a lot of like-minded people around growing up.
Yes.
So I know you said that the school was linked to the church you were going to.
Yeah.
So faith-wise, did you feel like you grew up with a fairly strong faith or a good understanding of, the Bible? I guess where did that cross from just knowing the Bible or knowing Jesus or knowing who Jesus was?
Yeah, I think the Reformed Church is quite a legalistic denomination. So we grew up knowing what was right and wrong. In terms of the knowledge of the Bible, that was very strong. We had to do catechisms, canons of Dort, Apostles' Creed. We had to know all of that stuff off by heart. We had Bible classes and what they called Calvinettes, which is kind of like Christian Girl Guides, I guess. It was very kind of structured. And reputations were big, I guess, growing up for me. Like I remember understanding mum and dad telling me that, you know, what you do reflects on how we look in the church. So that was very much that legalistic kind of framework. So I knew a lot of the Bible. I knew a lot about the Bible, but I wouldn't say I had any heart connection.
Just
at that
a very
stage.
dutiful Christian daughter.
Yes. Yeah, make sure we tick the boxes. As long as I turned up every Sunday, no one asked questions, that kind of thing.
Okay. And what happened when you went to uni? What were you studying, and was that a similar community, or was that really different for you to sort of branch out of that community?
Yeah, I think I would have to say that, not proudly, but I've always been quite a rebellious child. I always, if someone said to me, you are not allowed to do this, I would want to do it because I would want to know why I wasn't allowed to do it. So if it wasn't explained to me, I would want to explore it.
Okay.
Which, you know, now that I'm a mum, I could understand how painful that would have been for my parents. So I guess for me, when I was heading towards tertiary study, I didn't know what it really was that I wanted to do. Mum and dad wanted me to be a teacher. I didn't want to do that, but I didn't know what I wanted to do. So I remember one afternoon I was hanging out with my cousin, and he kind of handed me a career brochure that the unis and TAFEs have, and I was going through that, and I spotted youth worker, and I thought, that's something I want to do. I didn't know whether it was, you know, child protection or any of that. I knew that I had a very strong sense of justice, so I knew that's kind of where that would lead me at some point. And so I ended up doing human services, majoring in youth work, and I kind of got to meet a lot of people that I guess my world hadn't encountered yet, from Indigenous people to people who were drug affected, or, you know, just really heartbroken people and needy people, which this kind of sector attracts.
Yeah.
And I just got so immersed in their world, and I kind of branched out a bit from probably my roots in my Christian faith to kind of exploring what else was out there on offer. I explored a lot of different things, from witchcraft, Wicca. I spent a bit of time in a coven. To experimenting with drugs and alcohol, to smoking ceremonies and Indigenous cultures and things like that, just trying to be part of a tribe there. Like I just wanted to experience it all to kind of see where I fit. And, yeah, that kind of led me to once I graduated, working in a drug and alcohol kind of arena. And it was in WA, it was like the newest kind of form of treatment that they were trialling, which was it's very common now, but we're talking 20 years ago, and which was really kind of out of the box, which looked at harm minimisation, drug harm minimisation. So we had clinics set up for people to come in and, you know, use drugs basically.
Yeah.
And so we were there to make sure they had clean needles, to make sure they hit the vein properly, like all that kind of stuff, which was, you know, now that I think about it, I'm just like, what was I doing? But, yeah, that kind of opened my world up again to kind of how desperate people were in the world, I guess. And my first client, unfortunately, committed suicide in front of me, and that I was 18, like I was really young. I wasn't mature enough to deal with that, and I really kind of decided that, you know, I needed a break from this kind of life, this world, but I also needed a break from God, because I didn't understand why God would cause so much harm or allow this to happen. So I ended up literally working in hospitality. I just ended up getting any job I could. I was a waitress in a 24-hour restaurant in Perth from there, I ended up working my way up, and I ended up, I think, within 6 months, I was running the restaurant. But because it was 24 hours, I didn't get a lot of normal time with, you know, my friends, my childhood friends, or so the family I absorbed became my work friends. And, you know, that culture, that hospitality culture is not necessarily a positive one. Again, a lot of drugs, just because people need to stay awake at night.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of, you know, daytime drinking to then try and get to sleep, and it was just awful.
Bit messy.
Not a lot of time for normal things, even like eating. I became quite skinny. I got anorexic. It was probably a number of years of that I found myself in a number of relationships as well, and I ended up in a domestic violent relationship. And I remember lying in bed just thinking, you know, you're a strong woman, like how are you in this situation? And eventually I became quite ill. I was diagnosed with chronic fatigue. I actually couldn't get out of bed for 6 months. I was just, I was a shell of a person, I think, really, when I think about it. And it was at that point that I audibly heard a voice say to me, you need to come home to me. And that was probably my first heart moment of Jesus, really, of his ability to rescue, I think.
How old were you when you got to that point?
I was 22.
So it's a long journey of, you know, ups and downs. You filled your life with a lot of different things. What was the difference from trying to fill yourself in all these different ways of relationships or jobs or, you know, habits or addictions to then the voice of Jesus? Like, what was the difference?
I think because nothing was going well, and I'm a bit of a perfectionist. So if things weren't going well, I'd always would find my way out of it, or I'd always find the ability to get back on top, kind of thing.
So you'd move on to the next thing.
I'd move on to the next thing. I'd find a way to resolve it and then move on. I couldn't do it in my own strength this time. And, you know, I'm a bit of a control freak, so that was really difficult for me. And I had also probably, because I was still while all of this was happening, I was still turning up to church. So my parents were none the wiser.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
My friends were none the wiser. I was ticking all the boxes. So there wasn't, I made sure that didn't have eyes on me enough to keep me accountable or kind of pull me home. And I think the other thing for me was because I knew from my foundational spiritual knowledge to what I was living was so polar opposite. And I just I was that wretch that couldn't go back. Like how could I, with all the stains of sin on me and my choices, how could that lead me back? Like, how could I even be accepted?
So your side of perfectionism just saw that as an impossible task.
Totally.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when you heard this audible voice of Jesus, which is really cool, was that at night time? Was it during the day?
No, I was literally lying in my bed, desperately needing to have a shower, but didn't have the energy to do it.
Okay. Wow.
And I remember just in sheer desperation, just saying, God, if you are actually real, if you are real, I can't even think how you might see me at the moment, and I just need help. And that's what I heard.
And then from there, what was the Jesus story? How did that go after that? You said something about your heart. It's like,
yeah, so I feel like I've got two heart moments.
Okay.
So from there, I was not living at home. So from there, I moved back home. I was able to kind of just pack my stuff and get out of the DV relationship, which is kind of unheard of, but I just had the strength for some unexplainable reason, because I couldn't even get out of bed to be able to get out.
Wow.
And I went home, started going back to church, really, like not just turning up. And our church had a different minister at the time, and he could see through my pain, I think, and he really ministered to me. And he had me talking through not so much my recent experiences, but just where my head knowledge and my heart knowledge was at. And then I started getting more passionate about what I was reading in the Bible, about wanting to, memorize verses. Psalm 121 was always a real massive one for me, which is really odd because Psalms and me, we struggle. But I was really reliant on Scripture, which I'd never been before. Like I'd learned memory verses because I had to at Calvinettes or, whatever catechism I was learning, but it was never because I wanted to.
Yeah.
I ended up doing my profession of faith, and that was a really big moment for me personally, because I was literally professing what I actually felt and believed. But there were a few people in the church that had cottoned on to probably my behaviour prior to this moment. And unfortunately, they would, approach me in church and kind of not celebrate, I guess, the fact that, I'd come back to the Lord, but more so, how could I do that? So which kind of reinforced my initial shameful feeling of my behaviour and, not being accepted, I guess. So I kind of retreated again, but I had my minister at the time, he was, he kind of held on to me tight. I ended up going to Bible college from that point on.
Cool.
Did a couple of years doing a diploma in ministry there. I felt really attacked by Satan while I was at Bible college. But the biggest thing that I learnt there was forgiveness. So this is probably my second heart moment, where I actually read a book by Max Lucado called He Chose the Nails. And the whole idea is around, when Jesus is on the cross and his hands are nailed in and the blood would potentially be streaming down from the nail, like that's almost covering a list of your sins. And that visual for me just gave me the ability to forgive myself and understand that despite me being a wretch, his grace is sufficient, and that, Jesus covers it all, and I am accepted because of that.
Wow.
Did you find when you're at Bible college, desire to learn more about God, did you find this alignment between head and heart as you matured in your faith to become more in sync?
It's a good question. I don't think so. I think because I really loved exegetical subjects, so I was really in the technical side of thing, which kind of goes more to your head knowledge than your heart. The heart was completely separate, was happening completely separate to what I was learning, which I kind of think is kind of cool at the same time. Yeah.
Cool.
So you were studying at Bible college and studying at university. Was this at the same time, or had you already finished your studies?
No, I'd finished uni, then worked for a couple of years and then went to Bible college.
Okay. So, you're currently working in a senior management position in foster care. How did you get into that role? Where you told us where you started, it's two very different positions. So how did you get to where you are today?
Well, I think, like I said, I always had a real passion for justice, and social justice became stronger and stronger for me. I started working, the church that I ended up going to because Bible college was in Geelong, so I moved from Perth to Geelong. I started going to a church in Geelong, and they had a chaplaincy program. So I worked as a volunteer as a chaplain in a school, and I met a couple of kids who kind of no one really wanted to work with because they were pretty tough. And I was like, they're my kids. Yeah. So I started working with them, and they were in the foster care system, so I kind of ended up linking with their foster care agency, and then I was kind of just poached to work for the agency, and then just worked my way up again in Geelong. And then we moved. I'd met Tim by that stage, so we'd moved to Canada, got a job over there, then we moved here, and then same story, just started off in foster care and worked my way up.
So, I mean, clearly you are so passionate about the kids that you are working for.
Yeah.
What's probably the hardest thing about that career?
The hardest thing is not the kids. Early on, I would say, would be the system itself. Just, I think the children are so torn between wanting to live with mum and dad to, wanting to be safe and protected, and trying to balance that, following legislation, potentially going against legislation to what's actually best for the child, and doing that without getting into trouble, maybe.
How does your faith fit into that then? Because you've got obviously a whole set of rules and regulations, then you've got the kids, but then you've also got, a faith which is, very active and potentially speaks into that space a lot. So how do you manage all of those things?
I would say it's kind of a dual process for me in terms of a lot of, you hear a lot of people in the sector say, this kid's trajectory is probably going to be prison. I don't like to go there.
Yeah.
I think everybody is redeemable. I was, so should be the next person. So I try and love them that way, I guess, and I try and teach my staff to love them that way.
That's so good.
Yeah, it's great, Mel. It's good hearing your heart around justice. It's really cool. Now, the first time I met you was on TV, and I noticed you were very tall, and you were accompanied a man in a wheelchair and a dog at some kind of talent show thing. Tell us, how did you meet Tim?
Right. I met Tim in Geelong. So I was going to a dinner, an event, and he was the singer for the night, and that's how we first met. So I never knew him. I'd been in Geelong for, I think, 2 years. Everyone knew who Tim McCallum was. Okay. I did not. Okay. And then I saw him, and he was singing with two other fellas, and I knew one of the other fellas. He just wheeled over after he sang the song and went, "Hi, I'm Tim." And I went, "Hi, I'm Mel." That's where it started.
So romantic.
He didn't sing for you just then and there.
He will tell you that he did.
Right,
but
right.
I don't
the whole
believe
performance
that to be
was
true.
just you being serenaded by Tim.
Yeah.
So what did you think, and what was it like meeting him, in the wheelchair, and then seeing him as a performer, with his disability, but then just seeing him as a man and loving him, for who he is? Tell us a little bit about that journey.
That was an interesting journey because I guess growing up I really can't remember a time where I didn't have a boyfriend. So I kind of jumped from relationship to relationship. When I was at Bible college, I remember distinctly praying, okay, clearly I'm no good at this. Like, I really just need to be single. I was dedicated to living a single life. I did not want a husband.
And to God.
Yeah. And I remember praying a really kind of cheeky prayer around, like, this is what I want, but obviously it is your will. But if it's your will, this is my list. So I was kind of like, if I have to get married, if I have to have a husband, this is what I want. And it was like, in my mind, the impossible list. You could not come up with that list. Enter Tim.
Wow.
Yeah, like as you both well know, we are the most opposite people you'll ever meet. There's really no rhyme or reason why we work. It's totally a God thing. But yeah, the wheelchair clearly was not anyone's. It's really not anyone's dream to grow up and go, oh, I want to marry a man in a wheelchair. Like it's just not. But the thing about Tim is, you don't see the wheelchair first. You see the man first.
Yeah, that's true.
And
he's a really good man.
Good on you, Mel. Well done there. Yeah, he was just really charismatic.
Happy.
Yeah, just positive and happy. Infective, I guess. Our first date was incredibly nerve-wracking, and he didn't tell me until the very end of the date that I had to wheel him home because we literally went to the restaurant up the road from where we both lived. We lived 2 houses apart, by the way, which we didn't even know. So I had to wheel him home. First time I've ever wheeled a wheelchair, and I wheeled him into bushes, cars, you name it.
Did you have the GoPro on that night so we can watch later?
No, but Tim, if you asked him, he'll give you a blow-by-blow. Yeah, look, it was so unusual for me to kind of even entertain somebody with a disability. My cousin has a disability, and I've always kind of been afraid of it. So this was really odd. My family and friends were all very cautious and were, like, do you know what you're doing? If you go down this path, you can't hurt him. He's been hurt enough. Your life will be really difficult. So there wasn't a lot of positive support either. But me being rebellious, I was like, well, I'm going to defy you all. And yeah, we dated for a year, got engaged, was engaged for a year, and then got married, and 13 years later, here we are.
Amazing.
So this was still in Geelong?
Yes.
So you got married in Geelong. What year was that?
2008.
2008.
Oh, Tim would be so proud of me.
Oh, so good.
I'm sure
you
he's
remember
listening.
the date. And then, so now you guys are living in Queensland.
Yes.
And you have a son.
We do.
Tell me about your son.
We have Nelson, who's 4. What do you want to know about him?
Is he like you or Tim?
He is equally both of us. He's extroverted, he's strategic, he's rebellious, he's energetic. He's a great kid.
What has being a mother taught you about God?
His grace is sufficient, is what I keep coming back to.
Every day.
Yeah.
Every day. So now, is there a story behind having Nelson and becoming parents?
Yeah, so Tim and I couldn't have children naturally, so we ended up having to go down the IVF path, which we always kind of knew, and I think part of God's wisdom, was that I wasn't necessarily destined or desired to be a mother. So if we couldn't have children, I wasn't going to fall in a heap. But, interestingly, Tim was desperate to be a father. So we were married for 8 years before we kind of even started talking about children. And when we decided to go down that path, I then was actually diagnosed with melanoma. So I had to go through some various cancer treatments. And then once you're diagnosed with any type of cancer, you can't then fall pregnant for 2 years until you're cleared for 2 years. That happened, and then I went through the initial stages of the IVF where they ended up finding that I had a growth in my tummy, so I had to get that removed. So that was another process. And then once I had that surgery, I found out that my surgeon called me, and I found out that one of the instruments they used in the surgery wasn't sterilised properly. So then I had to go through 6 months of HIV testing. So that prolonged it again. So I was like, oh, okay, we're not meant to be parents.
Not happening.
Wow.
And Tim was just, devastated. And then eventually we kind of got the all clear. And so we went down the IVF route, and we had a number of embryos, but a couple of those didn't survive. And I've had a couple of miscarriages, and Nelson was kind of in the mix of all of that. So we ended up with one child, which was fabulous.
And totally God's plan.
Yes.
So what brought you guys to DC?
So we were in Canada. Tim got a job in Queensland. So we kind of, from Canada, we knew we didn't want to go back to Geelong. We didn't want to go from cold to cold. We needed warm. So it was a guy that either, WA or Queensland. My sister was living in Queensland, and Tim's best friend was living in Queensland. I'd lived in Perth 23 years. Tim had his accident in Perth. So we were kind of like, let's hit Queensland. So we did.
God's country.
We started going to a Reformed church in Kimura. And it was, it was good. We met some really great people there, but we just didn't feel that we were necessarily called to serve in that church. And I was actually going to a doctor in the doctors next door to DC, and I was in the waiting room, and I happened to peek over, and I went, oh, that looks what that is. And I Googled it, and then I was like, oh, Tim went home and said, Tim, we need to check this church out. So one Sunday, I think the Sunday we went was the Sunday after his Voice episode aired, actually.
I do remember that.
Yeah, and then we walked in, and then, we really loved the worship and the preaching. I don't think it was Greg, actually, that day. It was someone else. And we've just been ever since.
Cool. Before we go, can you tell us one of the most challenging things you find in seeking to faithfully follow Jesus?
I think the biggest challenge I find is continuing to die to yourself and living for Christ. With all the world has to offer and how attractive it can be at times, it's hard to put Christ first. So that I would say would be my biggest challenge, but also my favourite challenge.
Yeah,
Cool.
That's really true. And it's really challenging for, I think, everyone. So thank you, Mel. Thank you for sharing your story.
Thanks, Mel.
And for letting us see, the work that Jesus has done in your life.
Thanks for having me.
All glory to him.
Awesome.
See you next time.
Bye.
If you'd like more information about what's going on at Disciples Church, check out our website or email us at podcast@disciples.org.au if you have any questions or feedback. Thanks for listening in. We'll catch you next time.